think of. So I came from that community and was just thrown into Chinese society, which is obviously predominantly Chinese. And I wasn't really shocked, but more so just fascinated by being surrounded by people that I'm not usually completely surrounded by. And it was really cool. So I came back and I wanted to share everything that I experienced with my friends and my family. And I struggled with storytelling and just encouraging people to go check out Chinese. So I joined these next two organizations, which is the 100,000 Strong Initiative and Project Panyo. The 100K initiative was made by Hillary Clinton in partnership with Barack Obama, and they had the goal of having 100,000 students in America study Chinese and eventually study abroad in China. And Project Panyo has a similar mission. Yeah, they have a similar mission. So I went to different schools. When I was 16, I was in high school. I would go to universities and high schools and try to tell my story and inspire people to go abroad themselves and learn the language. And through Project Panyo, I started a chapter at my high school to help students study for their exams or apply for other programs that will eventually take them to China. And I did that even in college through Project Panyo. I go back every year. They have a leadership fellows program at Harvard University, and I'm one of the coaches that goes and helps university students to cultivate their stories and go back to their own schools and start their own chapters and just spread the importance of being cross-culturally aware. And also while I was in university, I started a program with my friends called the Taiwan America Student Conference, also known as TASC. And this was built between friends that I have here who studied abroad and friends that I made in Taiwan. So I was on the American Executive Committee. We had, I think, 10 or 15 American students go abroad to Taiwan, and we introduced them to 10 or 15 Taiwanese students, and we just took them on a tour around the island and introduced them to Taiwanese culture. It was mostly a cultural exchange program. So we discussed differences in religion and environmentalism, business and education and sexuality, and how they differ from American society and Taiwanese society. And I was in charge of the Trans-Pacific Entrepreneurship Roundtable. So I was talking about the differences in business in America versus in Taiwan. So yeah, that's a lot about my study abroad experience. Studying abroad has really taught me the importance of understanding cultural norms, and that's why I studied international business for my MBA. Because even though I studied cybersecurity undergrad, I still want to work abroad or even just in institutions that support diverse teams or inclusivity, especially as like intercultural teams are becoming more and more normal. So that leads me to my very first question that I sent out to you guys, which is what does it mean to you to be culturally aware?
I'll go first.
Okay.
What I think that means is for you to be open-minded to learn another culture.
Mm-hmm.
So just like you said, you come from a Black community. Oh, I'm actually inspired by your story, by the way. So kudos to you, ma'am.
Thank you.
So I'm very proud of you. You'll go far. But like for your example, you come from a Black community. So even me, I'll be like, oh wow, like I didn't even think that was something possible that you could even study, especially Chinese. So one of those things is like, why would you study Chinese, or why couldn't you probably study? You can study anything. So that's why I think cultural awareness, just being open-minded to a different culture that's not yours.
Yeah.
Well, I'll go next. So first off, let me start with thank you for making me feel completely inadequate as a human being, based on your accomplishments. But I think, I think one of the things as Americans, we're so self-immersed into our culture that we tend, in general, I think, to consider all other cultures to be inferior. And I think part of being culturally aware is understanding that we are just one of many cultures, and there are some very long-standing cultures in the world that have an awful lot of depth that we frankly don't have in this country, and and just keeping that in context, just understanding where we fit in the world from a cultural perspective.
So I would actually counter some of that. I don't always perceive that America feels it's superior to everybody. I feel the big difference for me is America is very full of itself. Not that it feels it's superior to everybody, but it's very full of itself. We're wonderful, we're great, we're amazing, and everything else, forgetting the fact that, there's 197 other countries out there that are all contributing from a global perspective. So for me, the cultural aware it's not even just being aware, it's understanding. It's taking some time. I mean, I'm very fortunate. I've traveled a shed ton load, and I wasn't even born in a European country for crying out loud. So to me, it's more a case of being aware and having an understanding. So, when I go out to the Middle East, I'm respectful as soon as I get off the airplane. In fact, even before I get off the airplane, as soon as I approach somebody in the street, I don't approach them as I'm full of myself. I'm humble. You take a step back, and you go, okay, talk to me about you. You listen with the two ears rather than speak with the one mouth.
Yeah. I think those are all under the umbrella of being culturally aware, being open-minded, being sensitive to other cultures, especially being understanding of other cultures, and being aware of how that might affect you. So when I was preparing for this presentation, I did some research on what the best definition was, and I found this one is from Northeastern Graduate School. They had an article on this, and they said being culturally aware comes from an understanding of yourself and how you need to adjust to the environment that you're in. So to be culturally aware, you're acknowledging that you know what your culture is and you're finding strategies to adjust your behavior, mostly to achieve some sort of organizational or team goal. Even the word culture itself, I would say, is very dynamic and it varies from person to person. It's not just regionally based. So when we think of culture, we automatically tend to think of it's based off ethnicity or race, but it could also be religion, the region, and even office culture, organizational cultures. So someone who's joining your team now might have had a different culture at a different organization that they were a part of, and that's going to affect how they work in that new environment as well. And that leads to my second question, which was, how do you think being a culturally literate employee creates a better work environment?
Treat everybody the same.
Come on, you guys.
Not really. Well, it gives people some awareness about what they're doing. It's we call it awareness. Other people might call it quote unquote being too PC, but what's wrong with being aware about how other people practice their culture or their religion, like you said? It's like if I'm at a potluck, I'm not going to make, I know I have a Muslim coworker, I'm not going to make something with pork in it for them, because that would be called being a jerk. That's called cultural awareness and being considerate about what other people believe and what they might want to eat or something.
Yeah.
Although you say that, so having been over in that neck of the woods a number of times, there's an interesting one where at Israel, perfect example, they won't eat certain types of meat, but they'll call it, I think, what is it? They'll call it like little beef or little pork, and it's one that they're allowed, they substitute. It's always really interesting to see how sometimes some of those rules get a little circumvented. It's fun to listen to people sometimes on that one.
I want to try that now.
Little beef, little pork.
It's like it's like little cow or something like that. To that point, they're not. I remember running into it, and I'm like, "What the heck is this?" And they're like, "Well, it's pork." I'm like, "But you're not." They'll, "Oh no, we just call it little cow." And I'm like, "Oh, I love you guys." It's the same thing with Judaism. Certain things in Judaism aren't necessarily allowed, but it's all interpretation of the rules. It's always kind of fun. Sometimes we have this assumption. Again, perfect example is religion on this one. Religion is a very thorny subject when it comes to when people come into this country. It's like, well, they brought their religion. They're putting up all their own, temples and mosques and everything else. But we're not allowed to do that in foreign countries. Really freaked me out. First time I went over to Saudi and Kuwait to see how many churches were out there. And there were a ton of churches out there. I'm like, well, hang on. We keep getting told that you don't allow this to be built. They're like, yeah, you guys have got that in your heads for some freaking reason. You bring whatever the hell you want over here. And I'm like, we need to change the perception of what we see as that culture is.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I think when I used to, and now I do diversity and inclusion, of course, at Johns Hopkins, but prior to that, when I was working directly just with students, I would always reference the honeybee hive to reference culture. And I would use the hive and how they pollinate and how they eventually, obviously, it brings about honey, right? And that if one of these bees were kind of out of line, that they wouldn't be able to produce, right? You wouldn't have your OKRs, you wouldn't be able to have this amazing outcome, right? This sweet outcome. So that's how I used to explain it to young adults and kids, is like, that's what it means to be culturally literate. It's like to know your job and your role, but to also know the ultimate goal and be able to meet that ultimate goal on a consistent basis. I don't know, that's just my take on it. I don't know how you guys feel about that, but that's how I even consider myself about being culturally literate. Is at the end of the day, a company has a goal, and your goal should be to do your job well so others can do their job, and you guys can continue to move down the pipeline to make sure that the business is obviously running in an efficient, effective way.
Yeah, and I would also include that, you know, being in a diverse group has its benefits, but being culturally aware of the individuals in your group is just going to make it more successful, right? So the propensity for everyone to work together in a group is pretty high, right? So my success is your success is our success. So in order to solve problems, work together, you're going to want to have an understanding of, you know, a little bit of a sensitivity to that culture. It's just going to build better relationships. And at the end of the day, when you build better relationships, you build trust. When you build trust, things happen faster. And I know Chris knows that for a fact, and I know that for a fact, just being somebody in the world for a while. So yes, I think it plays a part of their empathy plays a part with that too. So I think those are important things.
Yeah. So you mentioned some of the things that I came up with. I had that it increases trust, it improves work relationships, it improves communication, and it streamlines project productivity. And this is another clip from the article that I had found earlier. It says, when coworkers are curious enough about each other to learn about cultural similarities and differences and treat one another's differences with respect, the positive effect on engagement is powerful. So when employees are dealing with foreign customers or colleagues, it's more likely to be less misunderstandings because they can understand people who are different from them. You know, even in today's society, for instance, we're having discussions about race relations in the work environment. There's going to be people with different or opposing views to your own, but becoming culturally aware will help avoid flare-ups and misunderstandings, but becoming culturally competent can help you to navigate the conversations that you're going to have in the work environment. And that's going to segue me into my third slide, my third question, which is, what does it mean to be culturally competent? Because now being culturally aware is not enough. There is a difference.
Would awareness just be simply, I understand it, and competent be actually putting it into practice?
It's perfect, exactly that. So I have a good example. You guys have probably heard of this situation before. When I was working with building the task project in Taiwan, I was working with American people and I was working with friends in Taiwan as well. And it's something as simple as the word yes and the word no. It has different connotations here and there. So when we have a meeting in America or a business meeting in America, we understand the word yes to mean that we've come to a decision or we've come to an agreement. But in Chinese culture, the word no is like completely avoided. And it's sometimes seen as disrespectful or just confrontational. So when I was talking to my Taiwanese friends, yes can mean anything from maybe to like, I'll try my best. It can mean yes, but it could also just mean like, yes, but no, not really. I don't like this idea at all. Can we figure out something completely different? But they won't say that at all. So cultural awareness is being aware of the differences in the culture around you. So I know that Taiwanese people avoid the word no at all costs. Cultural competency is being cognitive of those differences and knowing how to behave in those interactions. So for me, I had to adjust myself and I stopped asking yes to no questions because then we would get nowhere. I started asking questions like, how can we improve this? Or what are potential complications or problems that you guys see here? Any type of question that would help us achieve our goal. And that's one way that I adjusted myself to get us to that end goal, and that's cultural competency. Does that make sense? Am I explaining that good enough? Okay. Great.
I had to go to Japan last year a couple of times, and I remember I read a whole bunch about Japanese culture before I went over there, and I adjusted a ton because I'm not exactly a small person, and you guys see me, I'll just dive in. Doesn't work over there. Doesn't work over there. And to that point, yes definitely means 10 different things. Only one of them is what you think.
Yeah. So this is the different levels of cultural competency, and it's really just everything above it. So cultural knowledge, I highlighted as characteristics, values, and beliefs of another cultural group. Cultural awareness is understanding those other groups and being open to the idea. And cultural sensitivity is something that I think John touched on earlier, is where you don't assign, or Chris, you don't assign values to those differences. So it's not saying America is better than Taiwan, because America, when we're in a business meeting, we say yes and we get things done, and Taiwanese people don't. Cultural sensitivity is understanding that people work in different ways. And then cultural competence is a culmination of all of those things and putting them into a system that will help you achieve your goal. So it's defined here as bringing into its system many different behaviors, attitudes, and policies that work effectively in cross-cultural settings to produce better outcomes. So I'm going to wrap it up, and I'm going to just give a few tips for developing cultural awareness. And the first tip was to start learning. And that doesn't necessarily mean like mandatory classes on cultural sensitivity, although like that is sometimes important. But those aren't always sincere, or they're not authentic. So for cultural awareness, you have to want to know more for the betterment of your team and for the betterment of yourself. And my favorite way to gain cultural awareness is to throw myself into different cultures. So for me, it's traveling, and doesn't apply for everybody, but it could also be attending cultural events or festivals, diversifying your friend groups and your social media feeds, so getting to know people with unique backgrounds. You could even learn a new language, read a book, listen to podcasts, watch movies. There are just so many different sources of education if you want to learn more about a different culture. And then under Start Learning, I also have learning more about yourself. So what are your own roots, your own beliefs, and your own values? Think about your ancestors and their experiences and how that has impacted you. How does your family function as a group, and how does that affect how you function in group spaces? Are you more of an emotional person or a rational person? Are you we-centered or more me-centered? All of these things kind of help you see how culture plays into your life and how you can become more aware of your own biases. And that goes into my second tip, which is to ditch assumptions. And that's just stereotypes that we all have. It can come from your grandma, your parents, your friends, your community, classmates, colleagues, can come from anywhere. And you have preconceived notions of how you expect a person to behave. And someone mentioned this earlier, but for instance, thinking someone of a specific religion might condemn your lifestyle when you're first meeting them. Like, you want to get rid of all of those preconceived notions and just take each individual as they come. So treat others as individuals. It's so easy to just group people and categorize people into neat little packages and say a person from country X is going to act exactly the same as another person from that same country. But that's just not how life works. That applies for religion and races and even people of different job types. Not everybody in HR acts the same. Not everyone who's a stock analyst is going to act the same. So all in all, it's important to be aware and to have an understanding of different cultures. But it's just as important to know how to adjust your behavior to navigate those conversations. And that's it.
Nice.
Thank you.
Nice.
That was really great, Ymara. Thank you for.
Oh my goodness, I'm proud mama moment.
Yeah,
I just
excellent.
want to say this right here. This is my favorite picture. It's when I first went abroad. And in 2013, China is not completely open to the rest of society.
Yeah.
So they were looking at me like I was the craziest thing in the world. Like they had never met Black people before. They were rubbing me, trying to see if it was going to come up. Like it was fascinating. It was insane. But it
Yeah,
was fun.
I was gonna ask you that, like, how did they perceive you over there? Because I mean, your hairstyles was rocking it, so I'm sure they probably wanted to probably touch your hair and try to
Yeah.
figure out. You so
I
you
mean,
want
my experience is there is positives and negatives. So a lot of people would come up to me and ask me, and when you go to a country and you know they've never seen you before, I'm very open to having people have that conversation with me or touch my hair or touch my skin because they've never seen Black people before, and that's fine. But I remember like one time I went to the zoo and people started taking pictures of me instead of the animals, and it just didn't sit with me the right way. So I left the zoo. I couldn't do it. So it depends on the situation. But I had an overall positive experience.